Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
About 2 weeks ago, our entire family, myself, Antonia, my two boys from previous marriage, Gunnar Sawyer, age 9 and 7, our daughter Piper, and our dog, all went hiking at a local state park, Ohiopyle State Park here, where there's this river called the Youghiogheny River. And it's a beautiful park here in western Pennsylvania. A lot of people go hiking, and there's a big kayaking community there, whitewater rafting. And I grew up in this area, so I have been to this river my whole life. Like since I was a little kid, I remember going there and hiking around and whitewater rafting. A lot of adventure on this river. So I wanted to take the kids, and we'd do it like a day outing. So we went to the Ferncliff Peninsula in the state park, and we were hiking around. And you and Piper went up ahead, and my two sons, Gunnar and Sawyer, age 9 and 7, were with me. And we were out on some of these rocks near some Class 3 rapids, just below the main falls at Ohiopyle. And we were looking at the rapids. And I was in flip-flops, which is a really bad idea on rocks. I've never been on those rocks before in flip-flops. So bad idea number one. And our dog was with us, and he was jumping in kind of near the rapids. I was a little concerned about him. And my son Gunnar I was kind of stepped out on a rock really close to the edge of what would be very dangerous rapids if we were just a few feet beyond that. So if somebody fell in, it would be very dangerous to fall in the water right there. And my son Gunnar said, Hey, Dad, do you care if I jump onto the rock that you're on? And I said, yeah, that's no problem. I turned to look to make sure the dog Duncan wasn't, in any kind of danger or anything. The next thing I remember is I'm standing on a rock downriver somewhere, looking at a kayaker guy saying, Are you okay, buddy? Are you fine? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. What's wrong? I'm dripping wet. And I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, why am I wet? And both of my boys are standing next to me just sobbing and crying and like inconsolable. And I'm like, what has happened? I'm so disoriented. I'm like, what is going on? And I reach up and I realize my chin is bleeding. So I have no memory of what happened. So what I'm about to tell you what happened is all coming from my 9-year-old son, Gunnar, who witnessed the whole thing, and my other son, who's 7. Apparently when my son jumped onto the rock, I turned and I was startled by him, and I slipped off the rock and I went face down and I hit my chin on the rock. And it knocked me out. And I laid face down in the water near the rock in kind of this little eddy, like it was a little whirlpool of water for about 30 seconds. And then he said he reached down to touch my shoulder. I opened my eyes, lifted my head out of the water, gasped for air. My foot gave way, what was ever holding me in that little eddy, and I was swept down through Class 3 rapids. And he said I was bobbing up and down, and I was gasping and like moaning, and my hands and arms were flailing, and I'm reaching to grab onto something. Eventually, I get through all these rapids after getting bounced around all the rocks, and I reach out and I grab a hold of a big rock. I try to pull myself on, and I slip off. A second time, I grab it, and I finally get myself up onto the rock, and I flip over on my back, and I lay there for about 2 minutes moaning and crying, going just kind of, like in a moaning sort of way. In the meantime, my 7-year-old is crying and screaming for help, and a kayaker that's going by says, what do you need? He's like, my dad is hurt. He needs help. And so the kayaker makes his way over, and by the time he gets over there, I'm already on this rock. Apparently, he helps me with my feet. And this is where my awareness starts to come back into the picture, right? I'm starting to like remember pieces of being aware at this moment of talking to this kayaker and both my boys crying and me consoling them, because I have zero emotion about what happened because I have no memory of it, right? I'm just standing on this rock, soaking wet. And apparently, it knocked me out hitting this rock going down the river. I basically almost died throughout this experience. And I had to go to the hospital, get stitches, a CAT scan, all the basic things you should do after you have a major accident and almost die in a river through Class 3 rapids. And it obviously made me much more aware and appreciative of being safe around rivers. In fact, the one thing I said to my children right before it happened was, guys, this is a very dangerous river. If you fall in, you could die. They pull bodies out of here all the time. They just did one earlier this summer. Be very careful. That's the last thing I remember saying before this whole experience happened. So I'm sitting in the hospital later that night, and I'm thinking to myself, as I'm waiting for the stitches to happen and the CAT scans to come back and all this, I'm thinking to myself, I was completely unaware of my body surviving this experience. I have no memory of it. I was not conscious during the process. My nervous system took over for me in the midst of intense crisis, of almost death. It saved my life. My nervous system awakened and did what it was supposed to do. It saved my life. And our nervous systems do this often. Our bodies will often do this. If you're in an extreme, hostile, cold environment, let's say you're on Mount Everest and it's cold, Your body will start allowing your fingertips and toes to be frostbitten. It starts shutting down your extremities to save your organs, right? Your body is trying to save you, and our bodies do this all the time. And the thought occurred to me, if my body, which is kind of dumb, it just has this autoresponder to save my life, has the ability to save my life in extreme circumstance like this, how much more survival do I have in social situations or personal growth situations or the things that seem scary on the surface when my body's willing to save me in a physical place? I've got the resource in me. My nervous system will just react and save me at a physical level. How much more do I have the resource internally to myself to get through any other tough experience that might happen in life? And it was great because it was a non-emotional awareness of this. It was like I didn't have like this, I wasn't aware of my near-death experience. It like happened and then I woke up later and it was like I almost died there, but it didn't feel like I almost died. And it was like this moment of, wow, I have something in me that kept me alive. My nervous system kept me alive. I bet I've got other things in me that would just get me through almost anything I encounter in life. It was this like renewed sense of like confidence of all the things that might happen in my life going forward.
Yeah. Well, and the way that Gunnar tells it, it sounds like when you were in the water initially, you actually had a seizure. My sister had epilepsy, and so I've seen a lot of seizures in my life, especially grand mal seizures. And the way he describes what was happening for you as you submerged the water the first time before you got swept down, it sounds like you had a seizure. And it sounds like your body was working pretty hard to keep you alive. You got knocked out. The place where you hit your chin, where you currently where you had stitches, they've been taken out, but where you had the stitches, that's like one of the 3 places on your head that is the knockout zone. It's where like fighters, right? Like
Boxers
tend to aim in order to knock somebody out, like that sort of uppercut. So basically The Rock gave you an uppercut and then you passed out. And then, like you said, your body did everything it could to keep you alive despite your situation. And some people are not so lucky. They don't get themselves out of the river, and they do die on the Yakagani. Like every year, like you said, there's casualties. And so it is amazing that you were able to pull yourself out. And you were even saying before this podcast that you've noticed that people who have near-death experiences, a lot of times they'll become sort of inspirational speakers.
Yeah.
They'll end up realizing that they are fully empowered while they're alive, and how much their bodies do come through for them. And they'll maybe even experience a little ego death, which is, I feel like I've died, and that part of me that is attached to so many different beliefs or that so many different like concepts about life or narratives or stories or something, suddenly that all gets put into perspective real quick. And they'll realize that there's bigger things afoot, and that they really do have the ability to, I mean, if they're, like you said, if your lizard brain is able to help you instinctively live. And like you said, that part of us is so instinctive. It doesn't, the lizard brain part doesn't have like extended consciousness or awareness or like bigger game plans or anything to that effect. If that part of you is working so hard to keep you alive, then the other parts of your brain, your mammalian brain and your neocortex and all these far more sophisticated elements of you, how many more tools do they give you for survival? And the first thing that made me think of is a book that was recommended to me. I haven't read it yet, so I haven't vetted it. I just want to make that incredibly clear. I have not yet read this book. They were telling me one of the things that came out of the book for them. The book is called Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. And this is on my to-read list after I'm done with the incredibly brilliant book that I'm currently reading called Lies My Teacher Told Me, which I'm absolutely adoring right now. But this is the next book on the docket for me. And they were saying that one of the major takeaways in this book is that we were for so long, as sapiens, we were so long prey. We're kind of squishy and there's a lot of things that like to eat us or could eat us, that we were prey for so long. And then we evolved to use tools. And then all of a sudden we became predators because our ability to manipulate tools changed the game for us. And suddenly we're able to become predators and, really actually be at the top of the food chain. However, we spent so long as prey that we still can't shake this idea that we're prey. So we more resemble, this is an inference, by the way, based on another book that I read called Why Don't Zebras Have Ulcers? Which they recommend this concept of what's called the zebra shake, which is to sort of shake off those intensities of feelings that you get when you believe that you're in danger. We more have sort of the makeup, it seems, and again, this is inferring based on a book I have read and a book I haven't read, that we're more resembling sort of how prey experience life than how predators experience life. If you notice lions, they don't get ulcers either. Lions are like, they're pretty sure that they're at the top of the food chain where they're at. And they don't really seem to have a lot of like, sketchy moments of like, oh God, is this the end? They don't really seem to think about that. Even if something is attacking them and going to kill them, there's not this constant anxiety about life. Whereas if you look at like animals that are very much our prey, like rabbits, right? They seem twitchy all the time, right? And a rabbit's like, is it all going down? Like a rabbit at any moment believes that it can all be over for it. And that's a pretty good belief for a rabbit because that's generally how they live life. Yeah, it's all over for them pretty quick and pretty often, which is why they reproduce so much. So we almost more have this sense of sort of like it's all gonna go down any minute. Like we're at the brink of death at any second. We almost seem to resemble that more than the strut around, know you're completely safe, know you're at the top of the food chain sort of swagger that a predator has. And yet we are predators. We're at the top of the predatory food chain at this point because of our ability to manipulate tools. So what you're talking about, it is really interesting, this idea that we are so much more insecure than we need to be. Mm-hmm. We're so much more insecure about whether or not we're going to die. We're so much more insecure about all these different made up narrative story problems, challenges that might not actually be realistic, but it seems that we make them up all the time to almost justify our nervousness. But what if our anxiety and nervousness has nothing to do with our actual abilities or our real honest to goodness limitations? What if it just has to do with the fact that for a long time we were prey, and so we have this anxiety and anxiousness, and so then we have to go find a story or a narrative to justify a feeling that's just a holdover from a previous time period? What if actually we do have everything inside of us that we need to have? What if we do have a really complex, amazing brain that will help us on all levels, from falling into a river and at the last minute saving our lives, all the way up to the neocortex, which allows us to understand extraordinarily complex concepts and ideas and be able to solve major world problems or challenges. So I love this idea that what if we just reevaluate the concept of anxiety in and of itself? What if we just sort of go, hey, is there any reason for me to ever feel anxious? Ever? Like a lion could easily be killed by a dentist at any moment. And yet, does the lion is it always looking around for that dentist, right? Is it always like, oh God, somebody might come and get me. Like that lion couldn't care less, right? Until it happens and then the lion is fully in, fight mode. Is there any reason for us to feel anxiety at all? Is that justified? Should we have a swagger about ourselves, and is that justified, or should we be looking around like the nervous, twitchy little rabbit? I think it's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, there's something here about, there's a nugget here that your physical ability to survive impacts how much mimetic survival you can do too. So we have a lot of friends right now. At the time of this recording, Burning Man is happening in Nevada, the Black Rock Desert in Nevada. We've got several friends and people we know that have gone to Burning Man, and one of the what do you call it? The tenets of Burning Man is radical self-reliance. It's about creating a community in the middle of a desert from nothing, and being able to rely and survive in that hostile desert environment. And I think by doing stuff like going camping and having a fall in a river experience, or going and having to create community in a little city inside of the middle of a desert, or like proving to ourselves as humans on a physical level that we're able to survive something, it translates into a mimetic level, into the other stuff that we're working on in our lives. It translates into a higher consciousness level of, I can handle this too. I could handle it at that basic physical level, and I can also handle it at this level. And I think we're missing a lot of, at least in our Western world, we have such comfort, we have such convenience. A lot of people have gone through their entire life without ever pitching a tent and sleeping under the stars, or without ever having to build a campfire from scratch and cook their food over that. And I'm not saying that that's necessary for personal growth, but I think there's something to be said for the physicality of survival. It says to me, if it all goes wrong and I actually have to get down to the very basics of life, which is cooking over a fire and providing shelter and clothing myself with fig leaves, I'm able to do that. And if I can do that, well, I certainly can survive this social situation that's challenged me to have to confront my demons or to scale up, or like what we talked about in the last podcast, become aware of something in our lives that we don't want to see, what we resist persists type ideas. So I think there's something here with a physicality element to all of the scale up that we do in our personal growth lives.
Yeah, we've talked about before adding the quality of our food and making sure we're getting enough sleep and making sure we're drinking enough water. Like, all these things contribute to our mood and our mental health, and making sure that we're acknowledging those pieces. And we've talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which starts with the survival level and then moves up to safety and security, then moves up to love and belongingness, and then eventually gets to self-esteem and self-actualization. And most of our personal development that we do in this country and in developed countries is usually on a self-esteem, love and belongingness level or self-esteem level. Because we already feel like our survival needs are handled. And yet I've long said that in a zombie apocalypse, I'm pretty much going to be like the first person to get taken out, because I really don't have any survival skills. And yet I think I'm coming more and more to this idea that knowing that I can handle myself on a survival level is a big part of me resting into, so, like a sense of confidence and a sense of self-reliance. I really wanted to take martial arts lessons when I was a kid, and my parents, because of the paradigm that I was raised in and because of how they felt about war and that sort of thing, they wouldn't allow me to do so. And at the time it made sense. And now I'm 37, and I was thinking, well, first of all, as soon as I can put Piper into martial arts classes, I'm going to. Like, that's like one of the first thing I'm going to do, because I want her to have that sense of she can handle herself. Not to say that this is going to be the fix-all in all situations. I mean, there are going to be contexts and situations where she can't fight her way out of it, or she won't be able to, have what it takes to not, to not die from the situation. There's always a predator out there that's stronger than you. However, the lion doesn't care about that. The lion is just completely rested in its own predatory stance. So there are things that can take lions out, but they don't worry about that. So it's more about mitigating anxiety and stepping into your own ability to handle yourself and life, and, just resting into that. So it doesn't have to occupy a bunch of mental real estate and take you away from the things that you could be focused on that help you generate happiness. So I was thinking, I'm 37, and yet at the same time, when Piper is old enough to take martial arts lessons, I'd like to go join her. I'm going to start a regime of making sure that I'm in a place where I can rest into my own sense of, like you were talking about, radical self-reliance. I like the idea of being able to feed myself in a context where there might not be a power grid available, right? And easy to find food sources or whatever. I like the idea of being able to rest into my own survival needs. Now, this doesn't mean, there's not going to be a lot of context in which that is required of us. And you do have to be careful. I think of the book Into the Wild and the movie Into the Wild, where somebody who came from a privileged background decided to enter a space of radical self-reliance, and it didn't work out so well because they had not yet scaled up to the level in which they were relying on themselves. There's definitely scaling up that needs to be done.
Well, he also synthetically put himself in that position by throwing away his maps, which would have led him to a cabin close by. And by putting himself in that situation, he limited his options synthetically. Yeah,
there was a sense of idealism there around just being able to, to take care of himself without any tools. And we are at the top of the food chain because of our tools. So it's not a matter of like going, I can just throw away my tools and be fine. So it is a matter of equipping yourself. And yet at the same time, I really feel like there is a sense of confidence that comes along with being able to rest into our own ability to handle ourselves in just about any situation. I feel like, and this might not resonate with everybody in our audience. A lot of the reason why people come to Personality Hacker and read our articles and listen to our podcasts is because we talk about things that are definitely more higher consciousness. We talk about things that are more in the self-esteem, self-actualization level, and we might dip down into a bit of the love and belongingness or a bit of the safety and security if we talk about business or if we talk about relationships. However, this is dipping down to the bottom. This is at the very bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, which is survival. And I do believe there is something to be said, even if it doesn't fully resonate with you right now. I do think that there is a reason to ask yourself, do you feel confident there? Or is it simply that you're in a context where you don't have to think about it anymore? Because we've been raised in a context, anybody who's listening to this podcast has a computer or at least a smartphone or some way of accessing the internet. That means power grids. That means, that means a certain amount of privilege and luxury in your life. Enough so that probably a roof is involved, right? And food in the refrigerator is involved. So if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are in a situation where you don't really have to think about your survival needs on a day-to-day basis. That's most likely handled. And so we're very much privileged in this time period in history. We really basically have our survival needs handled if we want to. We have an infrastructure that supports that. So is there any sort of underlying back of the brain insecurity around, like, if it all goes down, will I be able to handle that? Is there any sort of insecurity that comes along with, like, the anxiety of believing you're prey, right? And what can you do to acknowledge and take care of and mitigate any sort of underlying anxiety that's coming along with thinking that you can't really actually handle yourself? So I think that there is a place in personal development that goes back to radical self-reliance. Now, I don't know how much Burning Man is actually keeping up with their tenets, because at this point, a lot of Burning Man, goers, go in a motorhome, which having just spent a couple weeks in a motorhome, I don't know how radically self-reliant that was. But that said, there's also a lot of people who tent camp at Burning Man, and a lot of different places. Like, just being able to sort of be closer to the earth and know that you can handle yourself. Can you identify berries? Can you identify mushrooms? Can you kill a squirrel if you need to? I mean, I can't, right? Because I get icked out by killing anything. But then I was thinking just the other day, this is a very interesting thing I'm going to reveal, but I was drinking a cup of coffee outside. I was reading outside on our back porch and drinking a cup of coffee, and noticed a bug in my coffee, like about a millisecond before it went down the hatch, right? And at first I would just have this knee-jerk, like, oh, reaction, or like, oh my God, I just drank a bug. And then I thought, yeah, but if the zombie apocalypse happens, not that I think a zombie apocalypse is going to happen, but this is how my brain thinks, right? I always think, in the case of a zombie apocalypse, which is my frame of reference for anything survival, as ridiculous and absurd as that is, I always think, yeah, I'll probably be subsisting on bugs a lot because I don't really like to kill small animals. So I'll probably be eating my share of roaches. And then I thought, yeah, eating a bug is a good thing. Like, that's something I have to really acclimate to. And I think things like, if I go to another country and eating a locust and honey is like basic fare. I always think, yeah, I totally would do that. I would totally eat a bug. And this is all part of that feeling of, like, is your comfort zone really narrow? Do you need the context around you to be catering to you? Or do you have a broad enough comfort zone and a broad enough skill base where, again, it's about resting into your ability to take care of yourself, resting into your feelings of, I've got survival handled, even if the infrastructure around me is not supporting that?
Yeah, it comes down to, you and I have this conversation weirdly after we met. When I was a teenager, I would actually get a sleeping bag and oftentimes not sleep in my bed. I'd sleep on my floor because I always was trying to make sure I wasn't getting too comfortable in my bed. Like, what happens if I don't have this bed someday? Like, what happens if I have to sleep somewhere, or I want to sleep somewhere? I want to travel and I'm willing to then sleep on people's floors. That opens a whole new world of travel to me. So I was like training myself to try to not sleep in my bed. And then we were talking, you're like, I did the same thing. I trained myself to sleep in a cot instead of an actual bed. And I think that's the kind of stuff that, from a training standpoint, if you can think about loosening up the ideal situation for your comfort all the time, that gives you a lot of options. And so I think that just gives you freedom, and as an ENFP, as an ENTP, I think both of us value our freedom maybe more than other personality types do. If we want to bring personality psychology into it, we value freedom greatly because that juices us up, puts us in flow to have that freedom of choice in every single situation. So stability isn't as important to us. So if you're here with us and you're like, well, that doesn't sound appealing to me. I want that stability. I understand that. And yet there are things that you can start doing in your life that might give you more options, more this sense of I'm going to be okay no matter what the context is. No matter what situation I'm thrown into, I'm going to be okay. And we're talking about that at a physical level. But again, I think of in terms of, building this business. It's sometimes a day when I say to myself, man, are we on the right track? Is this scary? Should we just be getting jobs and working in normal careers? And there's a system around that. Everybody agrees that that's the best way to go. Maybe that's in your world. Sometimes they're like, you have this business that's really risky. And sometimes if you're listening, you've maybe thought about starting your own business. You're scared. You're like, well, will I be okay? Will I make it? Will I be able to survive? Like I might lose everything. And it's, there's all these fears or trepidations, or people will think I'm silly or stupid. And then I think in terms of business now, I'm like, man, I survived falling in a river and almost dying. Like, what's ever going to happen to me in a business? Like, let's say we lose everything. We have to move out on the streets, of our town from not being able to make enough money. We're going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And I can always go get a job if I have to, but it's going to be fine. And so resting into the big stuff or the challenges in your life because you're going to make it through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I did, like you said, we both trained ourselves. When you met me, I lived in a beautiful house in Las Vegas, and I was sleeping on the back porch on the concrete it was like concrete stucco style back porch on a bed, on like a yoga bed mat or yoga roll. And in part, that was in order to make sure that no matter what the situation was, I was going to be able to be okay there. I was going to be able to be comfortable there. I think it's really a matter of it's really a matter of getting to that point where you know that you're going to be okay no matter what. I think that's a really important thing. And I also think, I don't mean to make any sort of statement that is going to alienate the men that might be listening. As a woman, though, there is a lot of, and as I'm getting older, this is growing. Earlier, when I was younger, I was just ridiculously, stupidly cavalier with my physical safety. And as I'm aging, though, I'm finding myself to be more and more, it's something I think about now, whereas I didn't think about it as much when I was younger. And I think there's a part of me that really feels like I have some serious insecurity about my ability to physically handle myself. And I don't know if men have the same insecurity that comes up for them as much. I think there's a lot of evolutionary programming in women and just acknowledging the reality of the situation around us that we are a little bit more vulnerable. So I think as a woman, this is a big part of deadening that, or not deadening, but mitigating that anxiety, going, I can physically handle myself. And that might be taking martial arts classes like I'm thinking about doing, or it could be taking self-defense classes, taking some sort of self-defense course, or just whatever you need to do in order to say, yeah, I think I'm going to be okay. I think I've got this handled. Not to be overconfident, not to stop being aware, right? Was the quote that I love to quote from Whitewood Small so much, which is, nature is unkind to creatures who lack awareness. So it's not a matter of deadening or, stopping your levels of awareness. You always want to be aware and you want to be vigilant if possible. However, it's also a matter of not having to hand over so much power to anxiety and anxiousness. It's really about, it's about acknowledging that our anxiety and anxiousness might not be because of reality. Like we might be anxious and giving a lot of mental real estate over to anxiety, not because the circumstance actually requires it of us, just because we are anxious based on old ancient programming. And, the new context might not require so much anxiety from us. However, if it's really difficult to acknowledge that there's a lot less reason to feel anxious than we think there is, then just handle it by going and taking some classes, right? Like go take some survival courses, or, go take some self-defense courses, or whatever it is that you need to do in order to mitigate that feeling of anxiety. Because anxiety, man, that will sap your energy faster than anything. If you really want to kill your flow state, if you really want to get into a major depression from lack of energy, amp up your anxiety levels, because that will do it faster than just about anything else. So acknowledging that there is an anxiety that we all experience from ancient programming, and then saying, being willing to reevaluate whether or not you need to feel that, and then going, well, what are some of the things that will make it so I don't feel that way as much? And then just going and taking that action, going and taking those courses or whatever you need to do in order to mitigate those anxiety levels.
I think there's also this idea of powering through. So the anxiety is one thing, but what if there's still some anxiety in the midst of doing something big in your life? You know, you're going to start doing that business you've been dreaming about starting, or you're going to get to that relationship that's a little nerve-wracking because you don't fully know if it's going to work out to the end, but you're excited about maybe dating this person or whatever the change is or the thing you want to do, and you can't get that anxiety to completely go away. And powering through, I think the thing about like falling in the river for me, one of the things that helped me think about is like my nervous system could have given up in the moment and said, well, we're going to die anyway, so let's just shut down and make it a painless death and just go and drown. And it didn't. It powered through. And I think in terms of like other survival, I remember reading about Richard Branson, who was on a hot air balloon, and the buddy he was with jumped off and it shot up in the air. And he was like going in the hot air balloon and writing notes to his family, you know, about how he was going to miss them and he's going to be dying, and like writing his final words basically to the universe and to his children and his wife. And then he said in his autobiography, he said, I had this moment of like, wait a minute, I'm not dead yet. I still have it in me to power through. And why am I giving up already? Why am I just throwing in the towel here? I'm gonna go ahead and try to survive this situation. So he worked some things out, and he eventually ended up in the North Irish Sea, and somebody came and rescued him, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he survived it, obviously, because he's still alive today. But this notion that, you know, on the little stuff, your nervous system is not going to give up. So why are you going to give up in that business that you're doing? Or is it going, it's tough. And even if some of that anxiety does come up, you don't just throw in the towel and be like, well, that's I just can't go down this road anymore. You power through. You rise to the occasion because you know that your nervous system would if it was threatened, or you know that your survival instinct would if you were threatened, or at least you would hope it would, and you would want it to in that situation. So why would you do that mimetically or relationally or on like a social level? Why would you just throw in the towel when the going gets tough? You got to give that big presentation, and there's this option to not have to stand up in front of that audience and give the presentation. And you're like, no, I'm going to power through in the midst of my anxiety. I know I have in me what it takes because I've done the work, like you're saying, to mitigate the anxiety, but there's still some of it coming up, and I'm going to push through anyway because I have this faith that I'm going to be okay. I have this faith that I've got the inner resource when the going gets tough. And I've been in these situations when I've been giving a talk in front of people, and all of a sudden my brain went blank, and I had this panic moment, like, oh my God, I don't know what to say. And I think, wait a minute, I know this material. I calm down, take a deep breath, I take a pause. It's a little embarrassing for a couple seconds, and then you regain your composure and you launch into what you're going to do next. That's the nature of like live radio or live TV or talking in front of people and things like that. Sometimes it just happens. So this is the kind of stuff we're talking about, is that mitigating that anxiety, I think, from what you're talking about. And then also, even in the midst of that, knowing that if you power through, the resource is going to come at the moment you need it. And it's trusting that you have that in you to be brought out in the moment you need it, instead of short-circuiting that and not giving yourself the chance to illustrate that to yourself. Like, give yourself the chance to bring that inner resource out when you need it most. And I bet you'll be surprised at how you rise to the occasion when that happens. Just like I physically rose to the occasion, you mimetically or socially might rise to the occasion when you do that for yourself.
Yeah. This whole concept of anxiety is... It might be one of the biggest energy saps that humans experience is anxiety.
Sure.
It's almost a complete and utter waste of energy in and of itself. It might like be the biggest waste of energy that we have as humans. Sometimes anxiety gives us really good resources that we need. If we're in a life critical situation, anxiety will give us boosts of adrenaline. It will give us boosts of all the stuff that we need in order to take care of the situation. But the low grade anxiety we experience on a day-to-day basis, this low grade sort of tension that happens underneath the surface, is just truly a phenomenal waste of energy. It really is. We siphon so much energy to anxiety, it's ridiculous. So I love this combination of acknowledging that the anxiety might be rooted in a fear of not being able to take care of yourself, or it might be rooted in a fear of something bigger, like what if the business fails? I think that goes back to survival, though. Like this idea like yours and my business might fail, and the anxiousness we might experience around that. That's not just a fear of failure. That's an anxiety that we're going to have to go back to a survival time period, that we might lose everything, or we might not have the resource to be able to make a living. We might be starving or on the streets or whatever ridiculous fantasy that our brain generates when it has anxiety around that. So I think it's always going back to that lower level survival fear that we're just not going to be able to, we're not cut out to make it. And so I think really convincing yourself, or really having an opportunity to experience that you're going to be fine, like you're talking about, you actually had like a near-death experience, and going, actually, I had everything it took to be able to be fine there. And so you carry with it that belief, that faith into the bigger stuff. And if you don't, say, have a near-death experience, which hopefully is something that happens to you, that's not something you go seek, except for you're bungee jumping, but that's not a real near-death experience. If you don't have it, then being able to convince yourself in other ways by skill building in that area is probably something that would be a good alternative. However, ultimately, regardless of whether or not it's expressed to you through a situation you did not choose, or you convince yourself through actions you take, right, through skill building, etc., I think you're absolutely right that this is all a matter of dealing with that massively toxic, energy-sucking, low-grade anxiety we experience day to day, and then bringing it to bigger game stuff, like bringing it to having a message and getting that message out and going, oh God, what if people don't want to hear what I have to say? Or what if they're critical? Or, what if people don't like me? Or what if I don't have what it takes to be able to get my message out, or whatever it is. Go, hey, is there something I can do to just kind of mitigate anxiety in general? Right? Like, can I convince myself or prove to myself that I'm able to take care of this fine? Is there something I can do at a lower, like on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, maybe at a lower rung to convince myself to cut anxiety off at the pass? Or maybe I just need to get through the situation and prove to myself that it's all going to be fine. Or like we talked about in an earlier podcast of what you resist persists, we talked about how sometimes you just need to acknowledge and surrender to the worst case scenario and go, oh, that wasn't that bad. I'm totally fine there. So what can we do to deal with and acknowledge that anxiety is a major energy suck and that we don't actually have to feel it? There are lots of animals out there that don't feel anxiety, even when they are prey. That book on why don't zebras have ulcers, they go through a massive anxiety time period when they're being chased by a lion, right? Like a zebra's like, it's all going down, right? Like all right, this is it. This is the curtains for me, right? The zebra's just like, it's fleeing for its life. However, if it gets away, if it doesn't actually get killed by the lion, if the zebra gets away, if you notice, after a couple seconds, they just kind of do this shake, right? Their whole body just sort of shakes and it resets itself. It's like their entire system, their entire nervous system goes, we don't need to be in adrenaline-induced running anymore. It's cool. The predator's out of the picture. I'm just going to shake it off and then just be sort of done and acknowledge that I don't need to be there anymore. So when did we as humans lose that ability to do the zebra shake? Like our fear of being prey and then our weird situation now of being predators, right? And we're still trying to work that through and figure that piece out. And then we lost our ability to do a zebra shake, which is to kind of shake it off and go, why am I feeling anxious right now? I don't need to do that. I can just reset my nervous system and go, okay, I'm totally fine. So it's a matter of recognizing how toxic low-grade anxiety can be and then learning our zebra shakes. What do we need to do? Do we need to physically shake it off? Sometimes that works, just to kind of do like a physical zebra shake and just kind of shake off that anxiety. Do we need to convince ourselves that we're going to be fine by taking a course or a class or putting ourselves in a situation where we rise to the occasion? Do we need to face anxiety of something bigger, like something a little bit more abstract, like a talk or getting a message out or building a business or whatever, and just, get through that and convince ourselves we can do it, or fail spectacularly and convince ourselves that we can survive that? Whatever it is, acknowledge that anxiety is not serving you. That low-grade, day-to-day, oh God, feeling that's in the back of your mind, that's a killer. Like it will physically, literally kill you. It will shrink the RNA in your cells, and you actually will die younger if you can't get past that low-grade anxiety. So whatever it is you need to do, to convince yourself that that anxiety is not serving you. Figure that out. Get your zebra shake. Get your skills built. Do what you need to do in order to remove that element from being a massive piece of your mental real estate. And then, experience the freedom of going, I think I'm going to be fine.
Yeah. And, that the other thing is, if you ask the question, some of these things might come into your life. I mean, that was the question I've been, one of the personal development things I've been working on in the last few months was, do I have what it takes? Do I need an external somebody or something to tell me that I've got what it takes? Or do I have it internally what it takes? And that was kind of a question in my mind that I was actually going through some personal development around. And then this experience happened, quote unquote, coincidentally, right? And I don't know, depending on what you think about, like the law of attraction, attracting events and things in your life that teach you lessons, or at least when they come into your life, you get the right lesson out of them. I don't know if I would have the same lesson if this had happened 5 years ago that I had now out of this experience. I don't think I would have seen it the same way. And I think that's the other thing, is to be aware of what lessons being taught here. What are you going to interpret from the things that are happening? And, if you ask the questions, sometimes those things will come in to your life. That challenge will come. It might not be literally a death type experience or near-death experience. It might be just a big challenge at work, in your career, or in your relationship. And you're saying, do I have what it takes internally? And then all of a sudden this big challenge comes in front of you. And that's an opportunity for you to have a lesson there, or a learning experience there that comes into that. So I think there's that awareness. And when the time is right and ready for that, those things might come into your life. So be aware and ready for those things, and just take a deep breath. Like Antonia's talking about, let that anxiety hang there for a second, diminish it as much as you can, but realize that the way out is through, and you're probably going to be okay on the other end of that, all that experience. So I want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. What's the experiences that you've been through? Have you had some experiences that have been challenges, things that have been illustrative to you? Like, I had what it took when the going got tough. Or the going got tough and I felt like I didn't rise to the occasion, and I wish I'd done these different things. I wasn't mentally or emotionally in a state where I allowed myself to rise to the occasion in this. And I wish I hadn't short-circuited that. I wish I'd let it go through the whole way and let the inner resource come up to the forefront to see what I was actually made of. I short-circuited that in my life, and that was doing myself a disservice. I want to hear your stories. We want to get feedback about what's been happening for you in your life, and what are some of the challenges that you've been through in your personal experience. You can do that over at our website, personalityhacker.com. You could also join our growing community of like minds. We're at facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack.
You can also rate us on iTunes and leave a review. You can do so on multiple Android platforms as well. However, it's a little more difficult to read those reviews. It's easiest if you leave it on iTunes, and we'd love to hear from you and know how you feel about the podcast.
One of the ways that we continue to grow this community is by you introducing us to someone that you know, like, and trust, a friend, a family member, a coworker, someone that you think would resonate with joining the discussion every week, just like you're joining us here. We really would love for you to introduce to somebody that you think this could be a really great conversation in their life as well as your life. And it's something that, now you've got somebody else to discuss these conversations with in real time as you listen. So would you introduce us to someone? I'd love to have an introduction. We would love to meet the people in your life and have a conversation with them as well as you. And as we continue to grow this community, we're very excited about being a part of that with you. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Can't wait to talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.